Good morning, everyone. Welcome to our first LinkedIn live session. It is exciting. It's we've been looking forward to this now for many weeks, and I think in the words of a famous film, we're here, we're live, and for this morning only, we've got myself, Wayne Yeomans, we've got Ryan Geldard,
hello,
and in addition, we've got our special guest, Mr. Daniel Leech. So, Dan, morning. How are you?
Morning, guys. Yeah, very well. Thanks for having me on.
No problem at all. It's going to be good.
Yeah, I mean, we're so pleased to have this started out, and for Daniel to be our first guest. You can't see on my screen, but just a couple of centimetres away from me, Sarah, who's put all this together. So thank you, Sarah, for getting us to
there. Well done, Sarah.
I think this was born out of really, wanting to have a real discussion with some of the real characters and personalities within the industry. And as soon as we started drawing up a list, Dan, you were one of the first people who came up. So congratulations for that. I think what we always like about when we speak, Dan, and with you is just how open you are and how progressive you are as a person and wanting to see real change within our industry. And that speaks in kind of the work that you do and the background you have and the things that you're really pushing. So we'd love to kind of get into some of that with you today.
I think for me, before we start, Dan, how's the new house? Come on, how's it going? I keep seeing all these pictures popping up on Instagram, but how's it going? How's the self-build experience?
It's all right. Yeah, we're about a month away from moving in, so I don't know why we chose during a global pandemic to build an eco home, but somehow we did. So yeah, we're about 4 weeks away, but it's an eco home. It's hopefully going to be a passive house. We've got air source heat pumps and solar panels and all that sort of stuff. So I'm trying to put my money where my mouth is in terms of where I think the future of the industry needs to be. But it's been pretty brutal the last sort of 5-6 months living in a little holiday let. So I've got my 2 daughters and my wife, and we're all sort of on top of each other. So desperate to get back to some sort of normality. So yeah, hopefully this time next month we'll be in the new house, and hopefully Boris will have let the shackles off, and it'll be hopefully the start of a new era. Fingers crossed.
Well, we got to keep a lookout for our invite for the housewarming party. So
absolutely, yes, that'll be in the post, mate. As soon as we're in.
That's it. Cool. Barbecues on the patio and everything. I would have hoped, Dan.
Fingers crossed. Yeah, fingers crossed. All feels a long way away still at the moment, but I think once we get in, and hopefully, as I say, that the social distancing and all the restrictions we've been living with for the last 12-15 months, I think we're all due. We're all due a few barbecues and beers, I think.
Absolutely, yeah. I think we've all learned that now.
Absolutely.
So do you think, I mean, that must have been tough the last few months in terms of we're all starting to see materials and trades dry up a little bit. I think that's quite common within our industry as a whole, not just kind of traditional construction, but the off-site world as well. Has that factored into anything through your kind of self-build, even at that level?
It has, yeah. I think labour's been a real issue, and we're still at a point now. We've got like an oak balcony that's due to go out on the front because it's almost, although it's a new build, it's been done in the style of a sort of barn conversion, and getting hold of even just basic materials like oak has been really difficult. So I think we're going to be moving in at the end of next month with no balcony. So yeah, just basic level stuff really. There does seem to be a real shortage of labour and materials, and on a positive note, everybody that you speak to on site is busy. They got work coming out. So that's the real positive. I think the negative is that there's obviously pinch points throughout the industry in other areas, such as, like you say, provision of labour and materials is a real issue for us moving forward.
Yeah, I think that's right. I mean, what it's allowing people to do, and we've seen it within our business, is you've got to get quite innovative, really. As soon as you're in a situation where you advise that the cold rolled sections that you might need are not available, then what are you going to change it to, and how quickly can all that come together? But it's amazing when faced with some of those challenges, you do become that bit more innovative, and I think it's allowing people to think a bit more strategically around provision of goods and services in kind of the non-traditional supply chain way. And it's definitely getting us thinking about kind of resource efficiency within design as well. And I'm sure that must be something that you're challenged with quite a lot in kind of your core businesses is, the job can be done with 12,000 ton of steel, but can we do it with 7? That must be something that comes up quite often in your conversations, I would think.
Well, I think we go on, Dan.
So yeah, I think it's we've always looked at. I mean, that's a subject comes up on every project. I think one of the things we've been trying to sort of emphasise around sort of digital really is almost trying to change the approach from it. When we talk about value engineering, I suppose value engineering typically for me over the last probably 10 years has meant sort of designing and drawing something cheaper. And I've always argued that that's not necessarily creating value.
That's not best value, is it? That's not best value.
It's making something cheaper. So I think from my side, you know, rather than honing in on, you know, designing something maybe lighter and leaner, it's more looking at the overarching thing. So, you know, what are we doing from the start of the project to the end of the project, so that the end user of that particular project, of that particular building, for example, is getting the best value. It doesn't necessarily mean they got it for the cheapest price, but it might mean that they've paid an amount of money that has created the biggest amount of value to them as they go on to operate and manage and own that building or that structure. So yeah, it's sometimes we get a little bit confused about what is value. It's not always cheapest price. In fact, it probably never is cheapest price.
No, it's not. It's not. I think what's become clear to me over the last few years really is something that we touched on before that conversation, which was agility. And I think businesses need to be agile these days. Businesses need to have the ability to move and change. And I think, you know, in the days where everybody had a set product or a set service has gone. And I think businesses that do still follow that path will fall away. You know, businesses have got to be able to adapt and change. And that's internal process, but also what you offer out there as your services as well. You know, our mindset is that we will build out of what we need to build out of. You know, yes, we've got a lovely shiny new modular factory that we keep him busy, but you know, not everything fits in that box. So, you know, we look at other angles, and I think that's proving to ourselves that we can be agile. And I think that's really important going forward now for us as a bit of a mantra, really.
I think, Dan, you're right though, aren't you, in terms of kind of just understanding where the value sits for clients is just such an important. I think you're right. It often gets overlooked within our industry, and you're exactly right in saying that in all of the walks of life, the cheapest thing isn't always. It's never the best, is it? You know, it never is. Whereas in our industry, there is that driver massively towards cost, and kind of as you've kind of alluded to as well. I think clients often, you know, get seduced by cost a little bit too much, and as you say, the building's going to last itself there for 60, 80, 100 years, and really there's a real legacy within the built environment. I think of projects where, you know, the industry's lost sight of that value for clients, and I can completely agree with that in what you've kind of covered there.
I've always been a big believer, right, that like ultimately the project is going to cost what the project costs. You know, the key efficiency for me, if you want to drive down that cost, is that everybody working on the project works more efficiently, and that will bring the cost down. But I think, unfortunately, the way that projects are procured, you know, currently, it's like ultimately what you're looking at is being the contractor or the supplier within the supply chain that doesn't lose their shirt delivering the project. And I think that's the mentality that we've got to change. Ultimately, whether the Tottenham Hotspur Stadium costs £500 million or £1 billion, that's what it costs in the environment and that it was delivered in. I think what we've got to try and do is get away from, you know, it's almost felt to me like everybody that gets their price the most wrong on the job, from the main contractor all the way down to the supply chain, wins the work. And then we all kick 10 bells out of each other and try and design it, build it and construct it and make a bit of money doing it. So really, we've got to look at changing that environment if we really want things to change in the industry, the culture in the industry.
You've worked all over the world, Dan, haven't you? I mean, you know, so you know, you've done some amazing projects, which, you know, we see, and you've talked to us around. How does it differ in your experience, kind of culturally and also, I suppose, contractually in the wider world? Do you see any changes in kind of how teams function, operate? Maybe, you know, you've worked quite a lot in Asia, haven't you, in recent years?
Yeah, I think that was for us, the Hong Kong project was a bit of an eye opener. So we started the Hong Kong Terminal 2 roof design in February 19, and I think the thing that really struck us from the very start was the lack of sort of really deep contractual sign up that the airport authority wanted. So for us, it was refreshing that instead of being pulled onto the project by the manufacturing provider of the structural steelwork, effectively, where we would typically get engaged about 6 to 8 months before the steelwork's required on site. All of a sudden, we were in a situation where the airport authority saw the value in appointing specialist consultants like ourselves to pre-design the project and create the sort of digital asset before it went out to the supply chain and the subcontractors. And what was really refreshing about that was, our sign up to the airport authority, didn't require liquidated damages. It required a very, very low level of PI. And it was all done in a very open and transparent way. So, no paper trail in terms of RFIs and TQs. Everything was done digitally in the model. It became the sort of single source of truth, really. And we just created this environment where the architect, the lead principal engineer, and ourselves were all looked as equal design partners on the project. So rather than us being the humble steelwork draftsman at the very end of the project, finding all these things that don't work and creating problems, it was very much about kind of challenging the design from a manufacturing perspective and coming up with solutions that effectively, again, gave the client a better end product. And even on the airport, even though it's what you would deem a traditional construction, we've been able to do a lot of the design and detail on the structure so that stuff can be made off-site, so that we can do some of the assemblies and stuff can be done in a much more controlled environment. So yeah, I'm not saying that that's the same sort of contractual setup that you get on all projects in Asia, but certainly our experience of dealing with the airport authority as a really large organisation and as ultimately the client, it was really refreshing because they were really interested in all the little things that we were finding and being involved in the process. And I think what they've ended up with is a really powerful digital asset that they can now take out to the supply chain, get really accurate costing and go and construct this thing.
So taking those comments on board then, Dan, what do you think stops us in this country? What do you think the barriers are like that stops us from doing that open collaborative approach? I know we all talk about it, don't we? We all use those buzzwords, but in an industry, we still got this little bit of, oh, you can't see what I'm doing, you can't see that. How do you think what's the process to removing all those barriers once and for all then?
I think it's going to be something that's going to take a long time. I mean, seeing little snippets like integrated projects insurances and coming into the market where everybody's taking a shared risk and a shared gamble, I think is a really good step in the right direction. But I think we've become so risk averse in the construction industry that we're creating this even riskier sort of environment to work in, because, as I said before, we're at a point where, typically speaking, a client would start a project by appointing an architect and an engineer. Then it's very difficult for the architect and engineer to take the project, too far along without knowing all of the different products and systems that are going to be used to construct the building. So I think what we end up with is kind of an incomplete set of information at the very start of the process that, let's say, for argument's sake, a main contractor would then obviously price up based on, which is incomplete. Their price obviously is a best guess because the information is got to be developed on. And what effectively happens is the main contractor who gets their costs the most wrong obviously secure the work, and then that same incomplete information then gets batted down the supply chain.
Yeah.
And ultimately the project gets built. Now, I don't for a second think that we're ever going to get to a point where, unless we really drastically change the way that jobs are procured, that we're going to get to a point where maybe the digital asset is completely finished before they go out to the supply chain, because it probably isn't practical. But I think what we have got to look at is going away from this kind of attitude that, well, okay, MAR have given us a price of £6 million to build our scheme. And if it costs MAR £7 million, they pick up the bill, so who cares? And I think that's the environment that we've got to change, because we're creating this kind of this embedded culture of risk where it's kind of like, for us as a business, we probably start our year off going, let's avoid the one bad project that crops up in every financial year. Let's try and find that before we get on it and avoid it. And I think that's the thing that we're very, very keen to avoid is this kind of risk averse mentality of, well, give us a fixed price. and it's your responsibility to make it work. And if you don't make it work, you foot the bill. And by the way, if it's not right, you also foot the bill for that too. So, that's not really creating a culture of innovation, of collaboration,
and that's the problem, isn't it? We've lived in that culture for 30 years, and it's a culture that's got to be broken. And the bigger contractors out there have lived and breathed by that mentality. Having worked for a few in the past, they love to go in at low margins and then beat the hell out of everybody else along the way to get them to a better cost. And we have to change that mentality. There's new forms of contract that have been brought in along the way, which was supposed to appease that, like that FAC1 contract and all those. They were meant to make these better into the process that we've talked about today, but that's still not used enough. People still keep going back to the default because it's what they know, and until we break that cycle, we're gonna keep going around on this hamster wheel, aren't we? And we've got to get off it at some point and all just say, actually, no, we're not doing that anymore. I
think a lot of it, as you say though, Wayne and Dan, is really cultural. I mean, we all have jobs that, even sometimes the most technically challenging jobs are the best jobs that you can work on because you're enjoying being part of that team and being with that group of people. And I think what we're saying here really is that some of the kind of legacy cultural issues in a whole kind of years and years of building up pieces of paper and system to try and manage, perceived risk. It's creating cultures, isn't it, where even with a new team, with all the bags of enthusiasm you could possibly ever have, you can really diminish a project from the outset. I mean, you said something there, Dan, which I just thought were, incredible, and it's a similar process that we all go through at different levels within our businesses, which is how do you find those problem projects? And I just kind of thought, and I wondered as you were talking around how important you see kind of personal relationships in that, when it isn't just always data driven, isn't it? It isn't just always around what fee can I get and what do we think the amount of hours and work needs to go into it. How much of it do you think is kind of relationships led, even in this all digital world that we're all starting to move in?
I think it's everything. I mean, we've always maintained all the way through that, we sort of say there's the new construction industry and there's the old construction industry, and we have projects that are sort of deeply immersed in both. So I would say that the airport project for Hong Kong is everything that we want the industry to be in terms of early adoption, in terms of lack of contractual liabilities and things like that, and a real environment to innovate and collaborate. We because the steelwork wasn't required next week, we were able to do parametric modeling and write scripts and program and code, and really try things out that in the reality, if we were chasing a 50-ton issue of steelwork next Friday, would we be throwing a bit of code and a bit of script at the model and seeing if we can speed things up? No, absolutely not. Because if we hit the button next Thursday and the steelwork doesn't go out on Friday, guess who gets a 10 grand back charge? So I think it's one of those things that for me, when you look at the way that you're trying to position the business, we're always looking for companies that treat us fairly and people that treat us fairly. So, I think for every difficult QS I've ever faced, I've always walked out and thought, well, that guy was absolutely horrible, but guess what? Someone's going for a beer with him later. Somebody likes him. He's someone's dad, he's someone's husband, he's someone's best mate. And there's a reason why he's doing what he's doing. And that, again, falls back to culture. It's become an ingrained behaviour that, like Wayne said, we're going to have to make money on the project. And the way that we're going to make money on the project is to let's point some fingers and see who we can apportion the blame to. And I think that's the environment that we're all going to go away from. If you want to create an environment of real innovation and pushing boundaries, then saying to someone, we want you to go away and come up with something really neat and something really good, but guess what? If it goes wrong, you're sacked, you're fired, you're off the job. No one's going to do it. And I think that's the thing. Everybody, you go to all these seminars across the construction industry that are clamouring for innovation and collaboration, yet we go back to our desks and we sit down and the environment is, come on lads, drawings to get out for Thursday and steel to get on site for Friday. So, forget about all that nonsense. Let's get cracking with the job at hand. And so like Wayne said, get back on the hamster wheel. It doesn't matter how quick you run, it just spins quicker.
But this is the problem, though, isn't it? Then, because that spans into, you know, people's health and well-being, doesn't it? You know, and how that makes them feel. And I think it's a topic that's been ignored for way too long, and it's only become more prevalent over the last few years when people have been more outspoken out of it. But people's mental health would and still gets really affected by that whole negative environment, which, like you say, you mentioned that meeting then when that guy's probably only going for a beer with his mom afterwards. And she's the only person who really likes him. You know,
Sounds like me.
He's got no friends. That's his mom. Let's be honest. But what it means is, though, you know, that's a mental health issue for somebody or the collective, isn't it? You know, that constant bang, bang, bang. You must do it for this. You must do it for this time. You must be here. You must be there. You know, it's a culture we've got to change. And, you know, I always use the word, I always say to Ryan, you know, no is not a swear word. You know what I mean? It's like, it's not, if it's used in the right context, it's not. But as an industry, we have to get that point, like what you were saying about cost, about program, about time, you know, but relate it to individuals, because the people that make these businesses work are individuals, you know, the people. And people have got different thresholds, and we've got to be more conscious about their health and well-being than we've ever been, you know, and our own.
I think it's genuinely think it's certainly the biggest threat to our business. I'm similar to you, Wayne. I've been in the industry for 20 years, and we've got like a really, really talented group of people within the businesses, but our biggest concern is that we're going to burn them out, because the environment that we're asking them to work in every day is unsustainable, because we're still doing the 8 o'clock, 9 o'clock, 10 o'clock nights to get jobs issued, because the information flow on the projects and the programs that we're signing up to are just unachievable and unrealistic. And it's interesting you mentioned about mental health. I mean, I've got some pretty strong opinions on that, and I think it's a really contentious issue. But you read a lot of stuff about mental health, and you know, it comes down when you're reading stuff about personal relationships and things like that to do with your mental health, and they will talk about, you know, stay away from that toxic person or that narcissist, or, you know, that person that's impacting your mental health. Well, actually, the environment that we work in the construction industry a lot of times is toxic. And the construction industry can be a narcissist. You know, we love to talk about ourselves. We log on to LinkedIn, and it's easy to scroll down and look at all these fantastic projects that everybody's talking about. But do you know what? Let's flip it. Let's flip it and be a little bit more honest. Every project that we're all singing and dancing about didn't go absolutely to plan. It wasn't perfect. There was a shitload of headaches in there that we're not telling anybody about, because what we're trying to do is go, look, we do a great job. And that was the same with Hong Kong. You know, for us, we signed up to what should have been a 9-month program, and it turned into 18. So it wasn't all absolutely perfect, far from it. But I think if you were looking at mental health, Wayne, and a friend or a relative was treating you the way that the construction industry treats you sometimes, you'd be avoiding it. You'd be saying, cut that thing out of my life, because it's impacting my mental health. So, you know, for me, what we're trying to tell our people is that we want to find the projects that are in the new construction industry. We want to try and alleviate that pressure. Of course, there will always be deadlines. There will always be commercial risk. There will always be time and money to factor into projects.
But it's how we manage that.
Absolutely. Let's make it more achievable. Let's make it more, you know, because nearly all my guys love the job. They love the job. They still love designing new spaces. They love to be able to say they've designed Hong Kong Airport or that hospital over there. You know, we designed it. But it's the environment that they're in. It's all of the day-to-day grind and the battle that they've got to do to get the information to actually do the job. That's the bit that grinds everybody down, I think, and that we've got to really look at.
We're all big kids. We do this because we like Lego. You know, we had this conversation a few days ago, didn't we? You know, we like building stuff, and it does become that childlike thing. But you know, we've been in this industry so long because we love it, and we are striving to change it. You know, the difficulty you have though, sometimes people who are seen to be wanting to change things become known as like rebels or renegades, or you know, whereas actually they should be seen as the revolutionists, you know, the innovators. And you know, we shouldn't be stifling innovation. You know, we should be embracing it and harnessing it, and that innovation spans across what we do, but also across our people. You know, we want our people to be around. It costs a lot of money to keep recruiting, training, and that that whole process, we want to keep people. We want them to be happy. We want them to enjoy the environment. You know, we want to get together after work and have a beer and go out and socialise and get to really know people, because, you know, what you learn is that whole mental health thing doesn't stop when people leave that office. That stress and pressure doesn't stop, and you never know what's going on behind the scenes with people, you know, personal lives, you know, things that are going on. And, you know, I'll be honest, you know, I went through it 2 or 3 years ago, you know, I think that word narcissist was used by my ex, actually. I think she created that word for me. I don't quite know why, but she did. But, you know, I've been there where it's a difficult, and then you add the work pressure to it as well, and it becomes a pressure cooker, you know, and we need to be able to recognise and know our teams enough that they can talk to us and that we are there, and we rise and fall as a team at the end of the day, don't we? And that's where we need to get to. So how do you think we're going to change it, though?
I think it's leadership, personally. I think, you know, we, as you've just mentioned, we're using kind of words like we need to manage this. I think it goes back to kind of old school leadership, which is around, you know, people having really clear kind of purposes and drivers, and then doing the softer skills. And I think that element is really lost in our industry. A lot of other industries really focus on soft skills, and I think our industry is very hierarchical, and I think it pushes the responsibility downhill culturally, contractually, and everything. And I think the best leaders in our industry who are really coming to the fore now capture, you know, the embodiment of just being really good servant leaders, you know, coming into the businesses, engaging with the staff, listening to what people have got to say. And it's easier said than done. It's easy to say in sound bites on times like this, but really showing that, I think, is important. And I think there's a really good opportunity as well for kind of the younger people coming up through industry to really drive that change.
Yeah.
And I'm kind of hear from you, Dan, as to whether you see that, you know, your things too.
Yeah, I think it's there's a couple of things. I mean, obviously the pandemic over the last like 12 to 15 months has made leading a team and leading a business incredibly difficult. We ourselves, through the whole of this process, really have only ever got back to having odd people in the office. Everybody's worked remotely, and, you know, that's meant not seeing people that I've worked with for 20 years that I used to see every day, not, you know, seeing them, probably physically seeing them twice in 18 months, which has just been incredibly difficult. And I think when you talk about young people and the fact that we're having this conversation today, you know, probably 18 months ago, we wouldn't have even considered doing this. But because we've just spent the last 15, 16 months on Zoom and Teams and having conversations and meetings in this sort of format, it's become second nature. And I actually think it's a really good example of how slow the uptake has been with regards to technology. Because, you know, 12, 18 months ago, a video call, if you'd suggested us having a 6-way video call, you'd have looked like, you know, people would have looked at you like you got two heads. And video, you know, Skype and FaceTime and this kind of technology has been around for probably 8, 9, 10 years, yet we've not used it.
Not according to my mum, it's not. You know, I go on FaceTime with my mum and I get her ear roll. You know, I don't get a face. You know, it's terrible. But it's that whole generation. It's all generations that are going to embrace the technology, isn't it? Not just, and the youngsters are the ones that are coming through that can educate us all, really.
Completely. And I think, you know, you look at the likes of McDonald's and stuff where they've got these touchscreen menus now, and you go in the restaurants, and when I was reading a report about the demographics, it's like, sort of, I'm gonna roll you two into my era now and say our era of people, we like to go to the counter and order our food and speak to someone, whereas the younger generation of people, they don't want that social interaction. They're quite happy to go and stand at the touchscreen and order their food, or even do it on the phone and go and pick it up.
And we sit in the whole Generation X, don't we? Is that where we sit?
I'm a bit younger than you two. I'm a bit younger than you two. Come on.
You are. You're in that real dodgy Generation Y category. You are.
Technically, I'm a millennial, and I wear that with pride.
It's it just shows you how quick things are changing. I mean, everything's about convenience now, isn't it? You want to be able to just open an app on your phone, touch a few buttons. And how many of us are willing to order something from Amazon that might be a £5 or more expensive, because it comes next day and you can do it in 30 seconds? That's just what you do. And we've found ourselves on a recruitment level with CADCO, because obviously we recruit and train lots of young people throughout the country. And the early doors, we were writing some of these kids off because they weren't answering the phones, they weren't returning phone calls. And what we actually found was that setting up a WhatsApp group or texting them, they replied instantly.
Yeah.
And so we had to sort of re-educate ourselves that we couldn't just take the viewpoint that, well, that young lad there, he never answered his phone and he never rang us back, so we're not going to bother with him. We realised actually quite quickly that we've got to change the way that we communicate, the way that we speak. And for us as a business now, we're looking at building an intranet, so that we can communicate to our guys differently, because we're not seeing everybody in the office day to day the way that we were 12, 18 months ago. So clearly, we're in a different way of communicating to the teams.
A lot of these people can type quicker than they can speak, and I think that's where it comes from. It's instant reactions, and then they've done the bit and they go away. Whereas a conversation can go on for an hour, can't it? Whereas a quick WhatsApp chat takes 30 seconds and it's done, and you've got your answer. So we look at efficiencies and stuff.
I think you're really pointing at something there, Dan, in terms of how are you going to lead and engage, and that's going to be different across all that cross section, isn't it? Of people, some people are staying in work longer, not traditionally retiring in the 60s. They want to keep on working. Then you've got the demographic in the middle, and then you've got your young people coming through, and all those people have different needs, don't they? And I think that's why I kind of point to it, and I've mentioned it a couple of times. Leadership is so important in understanding that, and kind of creating those cultures. So the best leaders for me find a way to unite everybody under one single banner, and then find a way to drive people along.
Yeah, I think when you're in contact with someone, Ryan, if you're in a changing room of a football team, or you're in the centre of an office, it's easy to lead because you're talking to people, you're in contact with people, and you can impart your culture. I mean, the biggest question I've got for us as a business, and we've talked about culture of the industry, is we've got a fantastic internal company culture where we're one big family. We socialise a lot together. We do a lot of stuff outside of work together. Certainly pre-pandemic we did anyway. And I think one of the things that we're really concerned about as a business is how do we maintain that culture, and how do we impart that culture on new people as they come into the business if they're not in the office every day. And we've got 4 or 5 new people, for example, in our light gauge steel team that have probably only met 10 people out of the 50 or 60 people that we employ over the last 6 months, because everybody's working remotely. So we're going to have to find new ways and new means. There's going to be things. There's going to be advantages and there's going to be disadvantages to this, but we've tried to really embrace this remote working. We've given all of our guys flexible contracts now, so that instead of being contracted to work 37.5 hours a week, they're contracted to work 1,740 hours a year. And what we've said to the guys is that you find what works for you on a personal level. Of course, we need to know. Are they working next week? Are they planning on working 40 hours? Or are they planning on working 60 hours? Of course, we need to know that. And we've got projects that need to be delivered. But what we've really tried to do is embrace the fact that we're saying to people, come to the office when you need to come to the office, stay at home when you want to stay at home, and choose the times and the hours and the days that you feel you work most effectively. And if that means some people go to the gym till 10 o'clock in the morning and then flick the laptop on at 10:30, so be it. But those guys have got to make a consideration that they need to be contactable, that they might have to have Teams or whatever on their mobile phones, and they might need to, go away from this whole, like, I turn off my laptop at 1 o'clock on a Friday and I don't answer it. That doesn't work anymore, because we need to be flexible and we need to be agile. So clearly a big change, and it takes a lot of trust and a lot of trust in both directions for both the staff and for the business to make that work.
I agree. No, I really. That's why I think, Dan, your team are doing as well as they are, and up against a lot of different levels of competition. And I think it really stands out. Particularly us guys working with you a little bit, it really stands out that we get through those gateways tons quicker because your team are really motivated and engaged. And we all say, people lament the 10 p.m. email coming through. But in businesses like yours, where that's, well, yes, but flexibly, my team see the benefits of doing other things in exchange.
Yeah.
I think it's really important. What I'd like to do, if it's okay, is just pick on a couple of comments coming through, if that's okay. Well, there's been around halfway through.
Yeah.
So loads of kind of great kind of messages, people wishing us luck and things. I just like to pick this one up from James, if that's okay. Thank you, James. James says early engagement, especially from a design perspective, is key to all projects, allowing efficiency and added value. Do you think we'll ever get to a point where the industry realises the tangible benefits of early engagement and begins to drive that from the top, allowing the time to get to the best solution for the stakeholders rather than a single key driver being cost and ROI? And if so, how do we educate that to the people no matter?
Can I jump in there with that one?
Okay, yeah. Great.
I think what I've been fighting for years is that understanding what James has mentioned there, which is go right to the end of the process, which is that return on investment. You know, if we're look at the resi sector, and I'll use that as an example, you know, we can build a great, you know, build to rent block or whatever it might be, private rents, social affordable. But the fact is we can be building it 40, 50% quicker. And that is a return on investment for somebody, whether it's a private developer and cash, or whether it's local authorities to get people into homes. You know, there's that return on investment has got many, many meanings in that sense. But, you know, we've got to start and use and get the big QSs, PM, cost consultants on board, because there's that bit of data that I believe is never put forward to a client at that early stage, which is, you know, they're giving cost bases for all these types of forms of construction, and A will cost you this, B this, C this, and D this. But what they never say is, but if you factor on the program benefits as well, and all the other tangible benefits like the digital construction aspect and how simplified that process can be, do you know what? A then becomes C, and C becomes B, and B becomes A, you know, and all of a sudden that whole parameter's changed. And I think it's all about the industry education, the clients better. And I think once we can do that, and as an industry, we can get to that holy grail of whole life costing and should cost models and all that kind of thing, I think it will really change the face of what we all do.
Yeah. And what do you think, Dan?
Yeah, I think it's that a little bit still focusing on that kind of risk averse culture. I guess it's, if we applied it all to ourselves on a personal level, you know, if we were putting a conservatory on the back of our house and we said, right, we've got a £15,000 budget, and someone came along and said, okay, it's going to cost you £17,000, but we can build it in a way that you'd never need to build it again. It will be cheaper to run. It will be cheaper to manage. You know, you can have underfloor heating in there. And actually, over a number of years, the money that you would have spent would diminish based on an extra £2,000. Or you've got your neighbour that says they can do it for 12 grand. 9 times out of 10, people will go, I'll spend the 12 grand with my neighbour and get it done and pocket the 3 grand and go on holiday. And I think that's the ingrained culture that we've got to re-educate, which is actually spending money at the front end of the project on the digital asset. So designing the thing out and putting more time and effort and energy into that process will save so much money at the back end, you know. So you might have to spend a little bit more money at the front end on design, but the amount of money that you can save, so that, you know, you're reducing the number of extra work orders and design changes, you're bringing in the program of the project, and ultimately you're building it to a better standard and specification, so it could go away from this kind of value engineering that's about making something cheaper. It's not. You might actually make it better for a little bit more money, but create far more value for the end user and the client.
It's like we said, isn't it? Best value doesn't mean cheapest cost.
No.
You know, and that's the bit that people have got to get to realise, you know.
Yeah, I think you picked up and you're both saying the same thing. I think our industry is so siloed in that every company is looking out for their best interests.
Yeah.
We really need a good cohort, really, and we need to lead us way through marketing better. And I mean that in a way that sharing successes and challenges, as we talked around earlier, Dan, it doesn't always have to be sunny side up. And I think to answer James' question from my perspective, it's around doing a better job as an industry at proving to clients that early spend and that early investment is going to be worth it. And that's very difficult because it's hard to quantify the pounds you don't spend, isn't it? And people just find ways, as you say, to take control of what they can, which is, well, we'll utilise the contractual leverages when we don't get what we want. So I think it's a persistent challenge, which we know that the government is quite well behind as well with the recent construction playbook, the numerous reports we've had from the likes of Matt Farmer and others. We can all see and feel in us gut that we need to make these changes. But for me, until we can get in front of the buyer and make a compelling argument with some really clever case studies and marketing, I think, we're going to continue to struggle as an industry. And I wouldn't underestimate how important that piece is. And other industries have done it well as well. You look at the growth of some industries, they've just got better at communicating across the benefits, even if they're not always obvious or tangible in the first instance.
Well, I think I mentioned it a little bit earlier, Ryan. It's like the integrated project insurances that we started to see. So I don't know what you guys are finding in your business, but like our insurance premiums are doubling year on year, every year.
Yeah.
It's becoming completely unaffordable, and the insurance industry themselves are pricing all of us out of the market. So we've got, maybe 30, 40, 50 consultants and contractors on a project, and we're all insuring the same thing. It's absolutely crazy, I know that Dudley Advanced 2, which is the building that we train our kids out of, that we weren't involved in the construction of that building, but I know it was done on an integrated project insurance model, and that worked incredibly well, because all of a sudden there was one project insurance and everybody paid in their share to that policy. And what it created was an environment where, instead of sitting around a table pointing the finger of blame at people, everybody had the same level of exposure. It was like, we've got a problem, let's fix the problem, rather than we've got a problem, who are we going to blame? And I think that's such a massive change in the mentality, because, like I said before, we're desperate to really hone in on the automation side of what we do in terms of the software and the hardware that we use. But we're not in an environment where we can, because in simple terms, all of my guys are picking up on projects where we're going, look, guys, we've got a 12-week program and 1,000 hours. And that's what we're really focused on, is let's make sure we deliver the job inside the budget and inside the program. And unfortunately, you're not given the time or the benefit of being able to actually really dig in and go, let's really innovate. Let's really push the boundaries of what might, on the next project, save us 20, 30% of time, because we're just chasing tails all the time. So very difficult.
We've got a bit of a question for you, Dan, as well, from Ellie George. Ellie's mentioned, how much is a problem is the current uncertainty and increases in materials cost going to be for our sector? What's your thoughts on that?
Yeah, again, it's a real challenge at the moment, because, again, of the way that contracts are procured and the way that contracts are written. I mean, to my mind, if the cost of steel is going up and the cost of timber and lumber and all those other things is going up, then clearly we all need to have an environment where we can pass that cost on. If you look at what's happened through the pandemic, well, certainly if you believe what you read, the super wealthy are super wealthier. So somebody somewhere, has got to ultimately pay the cost. If the price of steel and the price of timber is going up, then that cost has to be borne by ultimately the end user of the project. And I think you mentioned before, Brian, I can't remember whether it was before we came on air or since we've been on air, but there's certain dirty words, I think, that exist in construction, and profit is one of them. It doesn't seem to be allowed that we're all here as a business to make money. Because without making money, in simple terms, a business can't succeed.
You can't invest.
So I think it's a massive threat in the respect of the fact that the culture within the industry is so focused on price and cost. Ultimately, if the cost of material and the supply of material is going up and reducing in time, then we're going to have a problem. Absolutely.
I think Wilmot Dixon were quite, one of the bigger contractors in the UK. They come out and kind of published a bit today within the Construction Inquirer and various other news channels around their concerns. So absolutely, I think it for me, and from what we see, we are seeing prices going up. We're seeing fixed prices get unfixed quite quickly, and it will continue to be a challenge. But I think that there's elements for innovation within every challenge. To kind of deliver through. Just want to pick up on another comment from Kirsty. Thank you, Kirsty. Leadership is paramount. Engagement and an honest approach at all levels creates culture. Well, I think we can all agree with that.
Yeah, for sure.
Okay.
Well, I'd like to go on to a bit of lighter stuff now with Dan. We've been doing a bit of digging on Dan, and You know, there's a little bird told me, and I you know, you've got to convince me on this one. You know, something about table tennis and you almost becoming a professional. Come on. I've had a few beers with you, and that's never ever been brought up in conversation.
Yeah, it's true. I don't know if you're old enough to remember Desmond Douglas. He used to be an Olympic table tennis player, but yeah, Desmond Douglas was my coach when I was 15.
Wow.
Yeah, so I actually won the Shropshire under 16 and under 18 county table tennis tournament when I was 14 in the same year.
Wow.
Yeah, got to the semi-finals of the national competition, and was offered a what back then would have been a YTS in table tennis at 16.
We've got a sporting superstar in our midst. Wow.
Yeah, I don't talk about it too much, mate, because to be brutally honest, I haven't picked a bat up for about 20 years. And when I do, it's usually on holiday, you know, with the old ping pong, and I'm absolutely rubbish now. I can't play. So it's one thing that I'd actually quite like to get back into, really. But yeah, it's your sources are correct, mate.
The Desmond Douglas thing just pricked my ears up because I read everything Matthew Syed writes as an author. Yeah. So, did you ever come across Matthew in your?
Yeah.
Did you?
Yeah, I've read his books. Is it Bounce?
Yeah. Bounce. Black Box Thinking.
Black Box Thinking's brilliant. Yeah.
And then one which ties in really nice with this conversation here around rebel ideas, around culture and kind of bringing in people from different walks of life to improve performance. So. No, it's interesting that you ended up in that cohort. How much that must have shaped you then, mustn't it? You know, what Matthew Syed's about and the background you've got mixing in similar circles. Do you think that's what shaped you and your approach in kind of your working life as well?
To a large extent, yeah. I mean, I sort of, my family are like 5 generations of market traders. So like, I spent most of my childhood growing up, you know, on the market and listening and speaking to people, and just in an environment where, you know, probably at an early age, I used to think, well, my granddad's buying a sack of peanuts in at X and he's selling it out at Y, you know, by the bag. And how does this all work? You know, and you get thinking a certain way. And I think as we've probably grown through the business and the careers, I mean, even as recent as probably 8-9 years ago, we were 8 people in an office in Wellington, you know, and it was a small family run business. And I think probably the learning curve for us, there's so much information out in the public domain and so many self-help books that you can read and write. But I think ultimately it comes down to probably just conducting yourself the way that I've always felt I would want to be spoken to, or I would want to be talked about. So, you know, even in the last 12 months, right, when we've gone to sort of remote working, we had all the conversations that everybody would have had, which is, you know, at the start of lockdown last year when it was like 75, 80 degrees and all of your people are at home, you're thinking, well, is everybody sat in the garden here drinking a beer rather than sat in front of the laptops working, you know? And I think what we came to ultimately was the fact that in business and in life, people will, the people that work hard and that are committed will continue to work hard and be committed, whether they're working from home or they're working from the office. Yeah. And I think Wayne said something really apt earlier when we were chatting, and that is that, you know, you want your people to see the jobs as a career, not as a job. You know, you want people coming to work because they enjoy what they do. And I think the construction industry and the environment that we've worked in for a long time can be very, very challenging. And what we've tried to do is say to our guys, look, it's hard work. We know it's hard work. We're not saying that it's ever going to be easy. But what we are saying is we'll do our very best to create an environment that gives you the best chance of being able to have a successful career and an enjoyable job, and celebrating the successes and also talking about the challenges and the failures at the same time, I think is really important. So,
well, that takes us back quite nicely back to your barbecue, Dan. That's a good team bonding exercise, and me and Ryan are certainly in on that as well. So yeah, don't forget the invite.
Yeah. I think that's the thing. I think that's the thing, Dan, that comes through with you is that, and I mean, Anna Whiting just put a comment up around you being one of the kindest people in the industry, and that's I've always felt when we spoke, Dan, it's a really warm conversation where you're genuinely interested in our challenges and what we want to do, and I think that rubs off. I think, you know, you work with CADCO, seeing that new generation of young people coming through, the work that you do as a crew, you know, and the people you bring along with you on your journey. So, it's very inspirational, Dan, in what you do and continue to do. So if you were going back then and you were a school leaver, what kind of advice would you be giving to that person, either about our industry or life in general?
I think it's. I think what I've learned is that you need a lot of luck. I think in anything that you do in life. Ultimately, there's loads of people in our business and businesses that are far more talented and far more capable than I am at doing what they do. But ultimately, running a business. I mean, I read an article last night actually. In the same way that we've talked about mental health and stuff earlier, there's been this big clamour over the last 5, 6, 7 years about entrepreneurship and about people going out and doing. And I think becoming an employee has almost become something that's not as applauded as it's been in previous years. And I actually find quite the opposite. Being part of a team and being part of a business and a culture and a family, I think is really important. And I think that's definitely dawned on me over the last 14, 15 months that having been so isolated from a lot of the people that I've grown so close to over the last 20 years, it's felt really uncomfortable at times and very unnerving and quite what the long-term repercussions of that are going to be interesting to see. But I think in terms of talking to young people, and if I was telling myself anything at a young age, it's really to kind of not overthink things, to ultimately try hard, because we still believe, we say this in our CAD code classroom. I think we've got it painted on the wall somewhere, that it's your attitude, not your aptitude, that will determine your altitude. And we believe absolutely fundamentally that the people that are really committed and that want to learn and want to try and want to make a difference, they'll be the people that we focus our energy on. They'll be the people that help us grow our business and shape our business over the next few years. You haven't got to be a rocket scientist. You haven't got to be a brain surgeon. But I tell you, if you're committed and you're genuine and you're keen and you're interested, you can only go one way in a business, because good employers will recognise that very, very quickly. They'll harness that and they'll reward it. And I think probably the biggest mistake we made over the years was actually promoting, let's say, our best performers or our cleverest people, and just assuming that they wanted promoting and that they wanted the roles that we were giving them. And I think it's become apparent to us over the last 3, 4, 5 years that actually the fundamental thing in any business is that the people that are in the positions that they're in want to be there. And if they want to be there, they'll do a cracking good job, and obviously everybody benefits. So I wouldn't want to be 16 again, Ryan. That's for sure. I think our kids have got a lot more pressure than we had at the same age. And we've got a lot more distractions and stuff like that. But I think we've got a monumental opportunity here now in construction, with the emergence of technology and all the really smart stuff that's coming in. The fact that our younger generations and the people that are going to come in and shape the industry will embrace that technology far easier than maybe more the older generation and our people. Because we mentioned McDonald's earlier. I get really frustrated with the touch screens and having to go through and it takes me maybe 4 or 5 minutes, and I stand there thinking I could have told him what I wanted 4.5 minutes ago and walked out. So I think it's the generational opportunity that we've got, I think, will really help with the culture that exists, and certainly the stigma that exists around technology and just the lack of awareness of what can and could be done.
Yeah, I completely agree. Yeah, well, and I think that's a really good kind of note to kind of finish on today, Dan. Yeah. But I'm mindful just to give you a bit of a platform, really, to kind of, TDS are a wide-ranging kind of service provider, and I think you'd be better yourself just covering off what services you provide, if that'd be all right.
Yeah, of course. Yeah. So Technical Design Services Group, as we are now, we consist of 3 businesses. TDS is a BIM modelling and manufacturer level detailing business. So we design projects largely for manufacturing businesses, so hot rolled steel structures, light gauge steel and modular volumetric projects. And we also do a lot of sort of architectural metalwork, things like staircases and balconies. So pretty much if it's made of metal, we design it and detail it and do it all in a digital environment to allow the project to be manufactured and installed. We also have a structural engineering consultancy called Design for Structures, and we provide everything that you would expect from a consulting engineer. So infrastructure design, substructure, superstructure. And the whole ethos behind the Design for Structures team was primarily frustration, really, as TDS. We wanted to move up the design supply chain. So where we talked about Hong Kong before, there was a lot of barriers preventing TDS from doing that. So what we felt was creating a structural engineering service that we could bolt the manufacture detailing to. So we're very proud to say now that we're one of the only structural engineers in the country that are trying to provide the whole REBA workflow, stages 1 to 5, so that we can actually take the project from concept all the way through to a manufacturing level of detail. So that's been a really exciting development for us. And then finally, CADCO is the third cog in the wheel. CADCO stands for the Construction and Design Centre of Excellence, and we set our academy up about 10 years ago, primarily with a view to creating a set of training and education platforms that really hone in on what the industry needs. We had a big frustration that the qualifications that were on offer were too generic and weren't really focused on what the actual industry needs. And we're very proud to say now that we train in the region of about 60 young people up every year now across the UK and give them all of the digital skills that they need to take their careers on and to make an immediate difference to the design teams that they're recruited for. So that's been really exciting in the last 10 years, seeing those people develop in the industry, and most of them are still in the industry now doing the job. So we feel really proud about our achievements with that particular division.
Brilliant. Well, that sounds brilliant. And Dan, thank you so much for your time today.
Thanks for having me on, guys.
Pleasure as always. I just want to extend a few thank yous, Ryan, Sarah for setting all this up. Round of applause for Sarah. Everybody, she's done an awesome job. And thank you for everybody who's joined us today and the comments that we've had. There's a few more responses that will get sent back through the blog post as well to those that we haven't been able to get to on questions today. But thank you to everybody, and we look forward to going live again in the very near future. Thank you, everybody.
I would just like to say my thanks, guys, to you, because one thing we haven't touched upon is that over the last sort of 6 to 8 months, we've developed a relationship with you guys, and you guys absolutely very much feature in what I deem the new construction industry. You guys have been really open, really honest. We've had a really sort of open book type mentality with you guys. The feedback in both directions has been great. It's always been constructive, and we're really looking forward to developing the relationship on and continuing to work with MAR and what I think is a really emerging business in the construction industry. And we're really delighted to be able to work with you guys. So thank you.
Thank you, Dan. Good stuff. Thank you all. See you soon.
Cheers. Thanks. Bye, guys.